November 4, 1914. Britain's ship Endurance was advancing toward Antarctica, the world's most dangerous and mysterious continent, crossing some stormy seas. This ship carried a crew of 28 people, commanded by explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton, who wanted to achieve something never done before in history: to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. Before we proceed, if you want to enjoy this journey more, imagine that you are also one of the crew members and suffer from all the hardships of that survival journey and feeling minus 50 degrees cold. Before you enter that survival journey, please tell your location and then like, comment, and subscribe for more videos of that kind. Now you're entering in an era with no smartphones, no GPS, no modern technology. Instead of lack of all these technologies, the crew is still intended to cross this icy continent completely on foot, in minus 50 degrees cold amidst blizzards, from top to bottom. Their plan was to reach the Antarctic coast via the Weddell Sea by ship. Look at the map. Exactly here, they would land, then trek on foot to the South Pole, cross it, and continue walking to reach the Ross Sea. A total trek of about 2,900 kilometers. If everything went according to plan, it would take roughly 120 days. But how disastrously this plan would fail, and what they would endure next, neither they could imagine at the time, nor can you, friends. November 5, 1914. The Endurance ship arrives at a whaling station on South Georgia Island. This was the last human settlement in their path. If you look at it on the map, this group of islands is located near the tip of South America. Below it lies the protruding part of Antarctica, called the Antarctic Peninsula, alongside the Weddell Sea, a sea surrounded on three sides by Antarctic land. Because of this, sea ice couldn't escape easily, forming a dense, permanent layer of ice. That day the weather was terrible, and conditions in the Weddell Sea were equally bad. People there advised Shackleton, delay this mission, otherwise going there in these conditions will be extremely risky. But Shackleton remained stubborn. He said, no matter what, we will proceed. December 5, 1914. The Endurance pushed forward, but soon the feared happened. The ice in the Weddell Sea turned out to be far heavier and denser than expected. Yet Shackleton continued. January 18, 1915. After sailing along the ice edge for some time, the ship became completely trapped in ice. A few days later, some crew members spotted a 15-foot crack in the ice 50 yards from the ship. This small crack was their last hope of escape. For 3 hours, they tried to free the ship by running the engine at full speed with maximum power, but the ship didn't move an inch. Crew members came out and tried to chip the ice with axes and chisels, but failed. Slowly, the ice floe trapping the ship began drifting farther from land. The point on Antarctica where the crew was supposed to land was called Vassal Bay, but the trapped ship had now drifted 60 miles away. The problem was that open water still lay between this ice floe and Vassal Bay. The crew couldn't walk there from the ship. Meanwhile, the ship couldn't move because it was icebound. Weeks and months passed in attempts to free the ship. Antarctic winter was approaching, meaning 24 hours of darkness. Not a minute of sunlight for weeks or months. Shackleton ordered everyone to spend winter aboard the ship. But winter meant increasing cold, snowfall, and blizzards. Gradually, ice pressure began mounting on the ship. Photographer Frank Hurley was aboard, equipped with a camera. He took some photos at the time, which you can see on screen. They clearly show how nearby ice was crushing the ship. September 30, 1915. Clear cracks appeared on the ship's sides, but the crew still held hope. October 24, 1915. At 6:45 p.m., ice suddenly fractured violently under intense pressure, and a chunk crashed onto the ship. A massive ice block shattered the Endurance's stern post, flooding the ship. All crew members sprang into action, trying to pump out water. They pumped non-stop for 3 days. but water entered faster than they could empty it. Temperature minus 8.5 degrees Celsius. Yet no fear or panic showed on the crew's faces. Some ventured out to cut away ice blocks pressing the ship, but it barely helped. Water kept flooding in rapidly, and ice pressure didn't lessen. Finally, Shackleton conceded defeat and ordered, "Abandon ship, get down." At this moment, crew member Tom McLeod, seeing the situation, said, "I don't think we'll ever make it home alive." The ship had been trapped for over 9 months. October 27, 1915. A sound like an explosion was heard. Shackleton turned back and saw a shocking sight. The ship's rear section had suddenly risen 20 feet into the air. The rudder and stern post tore away. Ship timbers began breaking, and the forward section flooded rapidly. Thankfully, all crew had evacuated by then. Soon, the water froze, causing the entire front section to sink slowly. As the ship sank, Shackleton's dream of crossing Antarctica on foot shattered. But now the question was graver. Could they even return alive? The crew had no radio, no telephone, no way to contact the outside world. They were stranded on an ice floe in the Antarctic Ocean, a floe drifting with the currents. On this floe was a large ice hummock where the crew set up camp. First, they took stock. What supplies remained? How much food and water? The answer? They had 3 small lifeboats, a sledge for moving on ice, some personal items, and about 1 month's rations. Just 1 month of food. Sleeping space was scarce. Many had to sleep directly on the ice. Most huddled together for warmth to avoid freezing. The chance of a passing ship finding them was nearly impossible. They were in the Antarctic Ocean. No ships came here. It had been over a year since they'd seen other humans. The outside world didn't even know if they were alive. No way to send messages, no hope of rescue. Shackleton had only one thing: trust in his own skills and experience. But how long could this trust keep him and his crew alive? What would they do when food ran low? Camping on ice wasn't a safe solution. It could fracture any time. They needed solid land. Shackleton calculated and estimated. The closest land was Paulet Island, across the icy sea about 550 kilometers away, an island at Antarctica's tip. Ironically, in 1903, after a Swedish ship got trapped, rescue gear had been left on Paulet Island for future stranded explorers. And Shackleton himself had funded that gear. Now, 12 years later, he was relying on it. He decided with the crew they would attempt to reach Paulet Island. All supplies would be hauled on sledges over the ice. Shackleton ordered, each man could carry only 2 pounds of essential items. Many had brought personal items when abandoning ship, but Shackleton said, "Nothing is more valuable than your life." He even left his own gold coins and Bible behind in the ice. Ship photographer Frank Hurley had about 400 photos and negatives. Due to the 2-pound limit, he could bring only 150 negatives. These 100 photos would later become proof of this historic event for the world. Within weeks, due to food shortages, the crew's puppies had to be killed. There was no other option. After days of preparation, all supplies were loaded onto boats and sledges. Each boat weighed nearly a ton and was hard to pull. Luck wasn't on their side. Summer had returned to Antarctica by then. Rising temperatures softened the ice surface, making hauling even harder. After 3 hours of labor, when the crew looked back, they'd covered only 1 mile. The path ahead worsened. Shackleton decided to camp there until the drifting ice floe moved closer to land. They named this ice floe Ocean Camp. Shackleton gave every crew member tasks to prevent boredom and depression. November 21, 1915. Pressure mounted on Endurance's rear section, causing it to suddenly lurch upward. It hung in the air briefly before slowly sinking completely beneath the ice. The crew had only moved a few kilometers away and witnessed this event. Though they'd abandoned it, watching the ship sink this way cast deep emotional gloom, like their last link to the world was gone. Now, only this ice floe and their ocean camp remained. Things were manageable for a few days, but weeks later, the ice floe suddenly drifted east, away from land. So on December 25, 1915, Shackleton decided, abandon ocean camp and attempt to march on foot again. But after just a few kilometers, they hit thin ice and open water. They could neither advance nor retreat. They set up camp on a new ice floe. To manage food scarcity, Shackleton imposed strict controls. Crew got 1 biscuit daily, diluted milk, cocoa, and a small amount of high-fat meat paste from cans. They also hunted seals and penguins for food. Food was still scarce, but Shackleton often lied about quantities to keep morale high. Don't worry, enough food to stay alive. He knew surviving this situation could take very long. What they needed most was mental strength. For months, their camp on this new floe continued. Thankfully, the ice drifted in the right direction. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. A new year began. On the morning of March 23, 1916, Shackleton spotted something through the fog. As fog cleared, mountains appeared. He recognized Joinville Island. But this wasn't good news. Joinville Island was at the peninsula's northern tip, meaning they drifted so far that Paulet Island was behind them. Joinville was just 57 miles from Paulet, but at a 90-degree angle west, with impassable ice between. Shackleton studied his map. Northward, he saw only 2 islands left if they drifted further, Clarence Island and Elephant Island. Beyond that, thousands of kilometers of open ocean, with waves so high survival chances were near zero. The sea between South America's southern tip and Antarctica's northern tip is called the Drake Passage, the world's most dangerous sea. Waves here reach 12 meters high. Over 20,000 sailors have died here, and at least 800 ships have sunk in history. Even today, in 2025, crossing it by ship shows terrifying scenes. It shakes even the largest cruise ships. Shackleton knew if his crew drifted into the Drake Passage, death was certain. Meanwhile, food shortages grew dire. Even slightly less rotten meat reserved for dogs was fed to humans. For drinking water, each placed a small can of snow against their body, melting it with body heat. But one can yielded only a spoonful of water at a time. An interesting fact, though the crew totaled 28, officially it was 27. In August 1914, as the ship left Britain, a 28th man, Blackborough, had stowed away. Shackleton had earlier refused him, "You can't join," but he sneaked aboard secretly. When discovered, Shackleton told him bluntly, "If we face starvation, you'll be the first eaten." April 7, 1916. Drifting on the ice floe, the crew finally sighted Clarence Island, about 83 kilometers north. New hope surged until winds suddenly shifted east. Eastward lay no land. Within hours, Shackleton and his crew's hopes shattered. Their ice floe was breaking apart, now just 50 meters long. Staying longer was dangerous. Shackleton decided all crew would board the 3 lifeboats and row toward Clarence Island. This water wasn't just water, it was filled with ice chunks and bergs. Soon, they found a sturdier ice floe and set up camp. But as they did, a crack split it. Suddenly, a crew member, fireman Ernest, fell into the water. Others scrambled to rescue him. Before they could recover, the iceberg split completely. Shackleton was stranded alone on one side, the rest drifted away in darkness on the other. No one knew what to do. Their leader, their commander, was gone. Then Shackleton's voice pierced the darkness. Crew members rowed back and rescued him. Back on the main floe, Shackleton first asked about Holness, who was shivering violently. Hypothermia risk was high. No fire could be lit. Without action, he'd freeze to death. Shackleton used his skills again. He ordered Holness to keep walking non-stop until his body heat dried his clothes. The poor man walked all night. Slowly, his clothes dried, and the cold lessened. Meanwhile, winds kept changing direction. 4 times they changed targets. First Clarence Island, then King George Island, then Hope Bay, finally deciding on Elephant Island, the last island before the Drake Passage, 160 kilometers northwest. As they drifted north, temperatures rose slightly to -8 degrees Celsius. Ice diminished, meaning fresh water ran out. Lips cracked from thirst. Throats were too dry to swallow food. They ate raw seal meat, swallowing it with blood. Their ice floe drifted closer to Elephant Island, now just 50 kilometers away. Shackleton ordered, "Launch the boats for the final journey." April 15, 1916. The crew couldn't believe their luck. All 3 boats landed safely on the island. After 497 days, they finally stood on solid ground. Having been through hell, this desolate lump of rock seemed like heaven. They couldn't believe their feet were on solid land, not ice. Joy was immense, but their troubles weren't over. Crew member Blackborough's legs had failed. Another, Rickinson, suffered a heart attack but survived. The biggest problem, Elephant Island was utterly desolate. No inhabitants, no rescue supplies, no way to contact anyone. Its location was so remote, no ships passed nearby. The question remained how to get home. Shackleton saw 3 options on the map. 1. Cape Horn, South America's southern tip, 800 kilometers northwest. 2. Falkland Islands, 880 kilometers east of South America. 3. South Georgia Island, 1,300 kilometers north for help. Options 1 and 2 were closer, but meant crossing the Drake Passage. Shackleton chose option 3. He believed winds and seas would favor a journey to South Georgia. After 36 hours non-stop climbing, on May 20, 1916, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean successfully crossed the Allardyce Range and reached Stromness. This was the first time in history anyone had crossed South Georgia on foot. The impossibility is clear. After Shackleton, this feat wasn't repeated until 1955 by expert climbers with full gear. Shackleton had only courage, willpower, and stubbornness. When they reached the station, they were unrecognizable. Long beards, faces blackened except for eyes, clothes in tatters. The factory manager recognized Shackleton, the man who'd vanished in Antarctica with his crew 2 years earlier. Everyone at the station knew their story as a tragic tale, the man who died with his ship. They couldn't believe he stood before them alive. The manager gave them food, fresh clothes, and beds. They bathed and shaved. The next day, Worsley took a boat to King Haakon Bay and rescued the other 3 crewmen waiting there. But Shackleton's real worry, his 22 crewmen stranded on Elephant Island. Over a month had passed since he'd seen them. Were they still alive? In such a situation, could you stay motivated to survive? Especially not knowing if your captain even survived the Drake Passage. Would rescue ever come? Honestly, comment below, how long could you survive? Shackleton tried urgently to rescue them, but upon arriving by ship, it got icebound. A second attempt failed. A third failed too. 3 attempts in 3 months, all turned back. As time passed, Shackleton grew anxious. He requested an icebreaker from the British government. They offered the Discovery, but it would take weeks. Shackleton couldn't wait. He didn't know how long the crew could hold on. He requested another ship from Chile, the Yelcho. On August 25, 1916, he sailed for Elephant Island again. After 6 days, on August 30, they arrived successfully. What they saw stunned them. Shackleton had appointed Frank Wild as leader in his absence, knowing they'd need leadership to avoid despair and infighting. After Shackleton left, under Wild's orders, they'd turned 2 boats upside down to build a shelter. For 128 days, they lived there, surviving by hunting penguins and seals. Amid cold, hunger, and hopelessness, Frank Wild repeated every morning, "Pack your bags, friends, the boss may come today." Boss meant Shackleton. But the boss didn't come. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Every morning, Wild climbed a hill, scanning for ships, returning empty-handed each evening. After 4 months, morale faded. Crew member Blackborough's foot became badly infected. Gangrene set in. They had to amputate it. With each passing day, they believed Shackleton had never reached South Georgia. His boat must have sunk. 4 months and 6 days after Shackleton left, Frank Wild decided to move on. He ordered everyone to pack, not waiting any longer. They prepared to sail to Deception Island in their lifeboats. But as they readied to leave Elephant Island, they spotted a sight on the horizon, a ship approaching. It was the Yelcho. As it neared, they saw him, their commander, their boss, Shackleton. He's here. The boss had finally come to save them. Shackleton was stunned. All 22 were alive. None had given up. After nearly 2 years battling ice, sea, and mountains, Shackleton and his crew returned home. When they landed them, finally, we left the sea behind. It was truly a miracle. Shackleton had left with 27 men and returned with all 27 alive. This was possible due to Shackleton's leadership and courage, the crew's determination, and unbreakable teamwork. 106 years later, in 2022, investigators searching the sea found 10,000 feet deep in the Weddell Sea Shackleton's ship, Endurance. The state of preservation is absolutely brilliant. No wood-eating parasites exist in the Weddell Sea. Incredibly, after 106 years, its condition was excellent due to the Antarctic depths. You can see its recent photos on screen. Today, if you visit South Georgia Island, you'll find Shackleton's grave. He'd set out to make history as the first to cross Antarctica on foot. Though he failed in his original plan, he achieved something even more miraculous and extraordinary.